This game has what many consider to be the greatest single strategic move in chess history. Some may disagree. You can put your in the comments below if you think there's one that is better, but I have never seen a better strategic move and strategic concept than Karpov shows us in this game against Unzicker in the Nice Olympiad in 1974. Of course, Karpov was about to become world champion. We know that in hindsight. Karpov had the white pieces, Unzicker had black. Let us begin. Of course, Karpov at that time in his career played e4 as his main opening. E5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop to a4. And we have the Ruy Lopez on the board, sort of the bread and butter of the e-pawn player. Knight to f6, castles, bishop e7, rook to e1 to defend that e-pawn. b5 kicks the bishop back to b3 and d6. Now here Karpov plays the most common move, c3. The idea behind c3 is to control the d4 square so the knight can't jump in. It also supports White's own move of his pawn to d4 and allows his bishop to tuck into c2 if black threatens it. Castles and h3 is played. This prevents the bishop to g4 pin. Pinning that knight would make it a little bit harder to play d4. You could probably play it anyway, but this is just a smoother approach from White. Now knight to a5 from Unzicker, attacking the bishop and freeing the c-pawn to advance to c5 so he can gain space. Bishop c2 and c5. And this is the Chigorin system against the Ruy Lopez. It's about as old as chess itself. There are two downsides for black. One is the weakness on this d5 square, and also he has to find a place for this knight at a5. It has trouble finding a home, but black has space and otherwise a solid position. Karpov plays d4, gaining that central space for white. Queen to c7. This helps defend the e5 square. And if the c file opens up, the queen is perfectly positioned to take advantage of that. The knight goes to d2. The knight can go to f1 and then pop in e3 or g3 later. And now knight to c6. This is the first attempt by black to reroute that misplaced knight. And here Karpov plays d5, immediately gaining space in the center, hitting that knight with tempo. The only potential downside, by locking the center and removing that mobility, it's a little bit easier for black to know what to do strategically, but having space is permanent in this case. So the knight moves to d8. This knight could end up on f7 after obviously quite a few moves. It could also go to b7, and then black can get in c4, hop into c5. That would be black's best scenario. Karpov immediately plays a4, not letting black rest. He threatens to take the b pawn and open up the a file. And since the a6 pawn is pinned, Unzicker moves the rook to b8, but Karpov takes on b5. And now he has some control of the only open file on the board. Black would love to play c4, knight knight b7, c5. So here Karpov plays b4. Now, not only does it sort of challenge that knight at c5, but keeping a pawn on b4 makes it so this knight can never land on the c5 square. And it really creates some problems for this knight at d8. Notice how Karpov is focusing on really small things. So just playing against a single minor piece is enough. The knight does go to b7 here. He does have to clear out the back rank. The bishop's going to go to d7. He wants to connect the rooks so he can challenge this a file. The knight goes to f1. Again, as expected, very standard in the Ruy Lopez. Bishop to d7. The rooks are now connected, but the knight on b7 is poorly placed. Bishop to e3, putting some pressure on the c5 square and pawn. Now rook to a8. Now black probably feels like he's doing a good job of contesting that a file, and it looks like he is, but how's Karpov going to deal with that? Queen to d2. Karpov connects his own rooks. Rook f to c8 with the idea of taking on b4. And if pawn takes, just queen takes bishop, it'll be very vulnerable. So to save that bishop, Karpov plays bishop to d3. And here, g6 is played. Unzicker is taking away the f5 square for this knight at f1 that would like to jump into it. He's also preparing bishop f8, bishop to g7. Again, it's a very standard idea in the Spanish. The knight goes to g3, bishop to f8. And here, rook to a2. Karpov is engaged in a fierce battle over the a file. He wants to move the other rook to a1 And if black takes this rook, then queen takes a2, the other rook is coming, and Karpov would have complete control over the a file. So instead, black plays c4, kicking that bishop away with tempo and gaining space. The problem is he's locked up everything on the queen side now. And this rook and queen situation, there's no activity at all to be gained on the c file. Here Karpov plays bishop to b1. Now, yeah, he could play bishop f1. That's fine. Also, bishop b1. The bishop is a little more in the way of Karpov's pieces, but he's also keeping e4 defended, which allows him to move his g3 knight, which is the only other piece defending e4. He can move that later. Queen to d8. So now he can exchange off rooks, and the queen can support rooks as they sort of feed into the a file, challenging white's control of it. And Karpov, seeing this, that black really seems to have neutralized his position, plays what is now the move that I believe is the greatest strategic move in chess history, at least that I've ever seen. Bishop to a7. An astounding move. I would be terrified of playing a move like this. I figured I'd probably end up losing my bishop to some tactic or something like that. But what he is doing, he's blocking off that a file. So now he can build up behind this bishop, and there's no way black can challenge the a file. He's going to leave that bishop there and build up on the a file. Really, really something else. Knight to e8, bishop to c2, so now the other rook can come over and double on the a file. The knight goes to c7, controlling the a8 square, again, hoping that when this bishop eventually, hoping the bishop will eventually have to move, and he'll be in a position to trade off pieces. Rook e to a1, queen to e7, and there's just nothing he can do about this bishop. He can't kick it away. It just stays there, and there's nothing he can do about it. Now the bishop goes back to b1. Perhaps he could play rook to a3, queen to a2, and triple on the a file. That's a clear possibility. Bishop to e8, and now knight to e2. The knight didn't have much future on g3, and what he's doing now, he's clearing the way so that this knight, along with the queen, will support the f-pawn advance. So he's locked down the queen side. He owns the queen side. Now he wants to get the other side of the board. He wants to own the entire board, all 64 squares. Knight to d8, knight to h2, clearing the way for the f-pawn to advance. Bishop g7 and f4, gaining space now on the king side. It probably was black's best decision. He probably should have taken on f4 at the very least, opening up this diagonal for his bishop. After knight f4, white is still better. This knight comes to f3. Queen to e5 would be a mistake because the bishop could actually return, in this case, to d4, and that would be very strong for white. But instead, Unzicker plays a little bit more passively than that, allowing Karpov to get that total control of the king side with f6. And now Karpov gains space with f5. Petrosian would be very proud of this. Of course, but he was at the top of his own competitive level when this game was played, so I'm sure he took special note of it. But here Unzicker, again, he plays g5. So he's locking this up. He played c4, he plays g5. He basically is just trying to hold on tight for survival, daring Karpov to find a way into the position to win. Don't worry. I'm sure he's going to find a way. Bishop c2, he has an idea for this bishop. He's noted that this square on h5 is actually quite weak, and he wants to reroute that bishop to d1 to help control that h5 square. Bishop to f7, now knight to g3. The knight also is controlling the h5 square. The bishop can go to d1. Here black plays knight to b7. He could have considered h5 to prevent the blockade of that pawn, but after bishop d1, h4, knight to h5, Karpov still has complete control over the position and is much better. But instead, Unzicker plays knight to b7, at least keeping the rook out of the a5 square where it can't attack b5. The bishop goes to d1, again to control h5, h6, and bishop to h5. Getting in on those light squares. Notice this light squared bishop is the bad bishop, and black's light squared bishop is his good bishop. So Karpov will be perfectly happy with their exchange. Queen to e8, not exchanging, telling Karpov he's the one that has to exchange. Queen to d1, lining up with the bishop, and also maybe even moving to the a file here. We'll see. Knight to d8. helping to defend that bishop. Rook to a3, king to f8, now rook 1 to a2, threatening a tripling with the queen behind the two rooks, which I believe is known as Alekin's or Ayekin's gun. I believe that's the right term for that formation on the A file. King g8, and now knight to g4, taking advantage of these weak light squares, threatening h6, putting pressure on f6. If the bishop were to be taken here, it looks like it's hanging, but of course it is not. Knight would take, queen takes, and then knight to f6, delivering check, and also the queen can take the queen after bishop takes f6. The queen would be lost. So the king goes to f8. Basically, Unzicker is totally tied down. He can't really do anything. He just has to wait for Karpov to find a way to break through. A knight to e3, king g8, now bishop to f7 check, getting rid of that light squared bishop, knight to f7, and queen to h5, using his queen to get in on these light squares. Knight to d8, queen to g6, getting in. Of course, if he takes the queen after fg6, this knight goes to f5, this knight can go to h5. Total dominance. He's just hitting everything, including this d6 pawn. He would have no chance. So he just plays the king back to f8, looking for something. And then Karpov plays knight to h5, and in this position, with one pawn, one pair of pawns, and one minor piece having been exchanged, almost all the pieces still on the board, black resigned, because there's just no way he can avoid the loss of material. Let's look at a couple of examples. Again, if queen takes g6, pawn takes, knight b7, knight to f5, attacking the bishop twice to save it. Play bishop h8, then just g7 wins material, one of many ways. And if the bishop just moves to h8 here, bishop to b6, and now the pressure on the a file is very strong. After rook a to b8, bishop can take the knight, rook takes, then knight to g4, coming in, threatening h6 and f6, and if the queens come off, you can see it's over. So really an amazing game, and that bishop a7 move is one for the ages. I hope you enjoyed this game. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.